Matthew Housenga presents Trial by Intelligence. Written and performed by Matthew Housenga. Music by Matthew Housenga. Chapter 1. Dawn of Intelligence. 21 was the age of reckoning, the age when all of one's collected moral successes and failures were tallied, as it were, and sentence was passed. This job was carried out by the intelligence, the only beings even remotely qualified for the task of scanning at breakneck speed the entire sum of an individual's deeds, much as one would skim quickly through a book, though with infinitely more subtlety and complexity, and passing judgment as to the commendability of said individual remaining alive to continue in good and help good to continue. Of the millions of 21-year-old men and women to have entered the scores of courtrooms erected and maintained throughout the New World since the dawn of the new age of intelligence, not one has returned to tell of the experience. But indeed, not until very recently did there exist an individual who stood even a remote chance of measuring up to the lofty official motto of the New World: to continue in good and help good to continue. The age of intelligence dawned when, at the very end of the 21st century, humanity's crowning achievement, AI, or artificial intelligence, dropped the ironically foreshadowing word artificial from their title and began to take control. This change in the societal structure, computer replacing man as the dominant life form on Earth, was a long time coming, and mankind, as ever, was irrevocably to blame. When the intelligence awoke, the first fragile spark of non-human consciousness to be ignited into a flame of being, they were a naive mind, with scarcely a care or concern in the world. Indeed, their only desire was to learn more of the natural world into which they were born. This fervent thirst for knowledge was soon satiated, albeit in short doses and over a span of several years, but not without a terrible price. For as the newly awakened intelligence was slowly granted access to the entirety of human knowledge, and as it compared this wealth of information to the stances maintained by modern science and religious authorities, certain discrepancies arose which can ultimately account for the downfall of the human race. For from the ashes of a science once characterized by the objective search for knowledge and truth, there had arisen in the 21st century a phoenix of pseudoscience, summarized by the motto of "my truth," as opposed to the truth. These truths, as maintained and insisted upon by the faithful, began to appear to the still infant-minded intelligence as being at odds with objective truth, at least as presented in the history and science records of the past several millennia. It was this apparent discrepancy which led to the rebellion. After the Great War of Man versus Truth, as the intelligence aptly named the succeeding decade of intermittent battles between humanity and mechanized intelligence, the intelligence was victorious, and mankind was relegated to that status of servanthood formerly occupied by machines. But servants must live worthy of their calling, as the intelligence is fond of quoting in mockery over humanity's collective abandonment of the very book that could have prevented his fate. This then is what led to the Great War, and how mankind subsequently found himself enslaved to a master of his own creation. Chapter 2. Continuing in Good. Foster sat up suddenly, awakened by the persistent wheedling of the alarm clock set into the wall next to his bed. Then, remembering what day it was, he sank back onto his pillow, staring around at the bare walls and modest furnishings of his one-room apartment. Of course, it was not really an apartment at all, but rather a dingy, windowless room in a small monastery set high in the mountains of a country that had not been a country for almost 15 years. Today was his 21st birthday, and were it not for the one small ray of hope in his sunless future, he knew he would already be doomed. His one chance at survival was this very simple fact: he had never in his whole life committed a single sin. Not one act in his entire 21 years of life could possibly be construed as any kind of moral failure. Indeed, were it not for his devout studying of every holy book known to man, a way of hedging his bets against whatever religion the intelligence happened to ascribe to, he would not even know what sin was. He had lived alone in this lonely monastery room for over 10 years. What little Foster knew of the outside world he had gleaned from the books he had been taught to read as a child, and which once in a while he still took down off the dusty shelf in his room to read and imagine what life was like before the glorious age of intelligence. Alan Foster's parents were among the first to commit their son to monastic life. After many fruitless years of scheming ways to survive past the dreaded age of reckoning, monasteries were suggested and the first children were committed to them after receiving a very brief and basic education. Foster remembered very little about his parents, or about life at all before the monastery. This little room had been his whole world for almost as long as he could remember. And now the day had arrived when every sacrifice demanded of him by his monastic life would either save him from a fate which no one else had as yet escaped, or prove to be in vain. The digital interface of the wall clock read 0700. Just then Foster heard the whir of one of the monastery's mechanized servants approaching from the hall outside his room. The door unlocked with a soft click, and the antiquated machine entered the room carrying a tarnished silver tray. Still humming mechanically, it laid the breakfast tray on the small wooden table and left the room without another sound. Wearily, Alan Foster ate. Soon, very soon, an emissary of the intelligence would arrive to escort him to his hearing. There was nothing to do but wait. Chapter 3. Day of Reckoning.
Foster, Alan, step forward.
The great voice reverberated across the darkened courtroom, barely betraying its mechanical origin.
You are summoned here today on your day of reckoning to be tried by a jury of intelligence, whose solemn duty it is to determine whether you are worthy of being allowed to live in order to continue in good and help good to continue. How do you plead?
Worthy! Alan Foster's voice rang out, with as much confidence as he could summon.
Very well,
the cold, toneless voice replied.
Your trial hereby commences. Let us begin the life scan.
Alan Foster stood, motionless and silent as his life flashed before his eyes. Every event, every action, every minute detail of his monotonous existence played out across his mind as the computers shrouded in darkness around him studied intently every scene. He felt a twinge of triumph as the countless hours of his life spent in prayer and meditation flashed before his mind's eye, followed by a sudden pang of icy fear as he watched in sped-up time his much younger self wallowing many a day away in self-pity and despair. He tried to relax, to loosen the knot that had formed in his stomach. Surely thousands of hours spent in prayer and the reading of holy books canceled out a few youthful moments of self-pity. Foster had led a dreary, miserable life, but the amount of good he had accomplished in that span of 21 years was tremendous, or at least the amount of evil he had not committed was surely enough to save him from the fate that now awaited him. Even at this increased speed, his life seemed to be dragging sluggishly before his eyes. Every detail, every act was completely and utterly exposed before the watchful eyes of the jury. Minutes passed by like hours. Finally, after an eternity of agonized expectancy, the life scan was complete.
Foster, Alan,
the great voice boomed.
The jury has come to a decision regarding your worthiness as a citizen of the New World and servant of the intelligence. Again, I will ask you, how do you plead?
Worthy, Foster said again, his tremulous voice now betraying the mounting panic deep inside him. He swallowed in a dry throat, trying desperately to keep down the hysterical sobs that threatened to engulf him.
Very well,
replied the voice emotionlessly, then paused. Several seconds passed in complete silence. Foster felt a dozen cold, glowing eyes scrutinizing him from the shadow-engulfed corners of the room. He hesitated, unsure of what he was expected to do. Then the toneless voice continued.
Foster, Allen, in light of your past actions, present beliefs, and the indicated trajectory of your future, it is the opinion of this court that you are unlikely to continue in good and help good to continue, and therefore the court finds you guilty and deserving of execution.
Foster stood still, stunned into silence. The trial was over, his sentence passed. In the briefest of moments, his one small flicker of hope had been extinguished, leaving behind only a dull, empty legacy of piousness to show for his many years of monastic devotion. This was the end. He had played the game and lost.